Hi guys, it's Mr. Holding, and this quick video is regarding the evaporation and distillation prac for Year 7, and specifically we're going to look at the annotated diagram. So you'll notice that it says in the results section, draw an annotated diagram to show the setup of the experiment and identify and explain the process of what's happening. Okay, so the big difference between just a standard diagram, a setup diagram where you might look at and go, oh, okay, that's how the equipment is set up, and an annotated diagram is the notes, is the annotations that are involved. Okay, so it's important that you're aware of that, because your job in this diagram is to identify what's going on. Okay, so not you sit there and go, okay, for instance, you point to the beaker and say heat is being provided to cause it to boil. So you've identified it, and then explain what's going on. Okay, so heat is supplied to the beaker to cause it to boil. This causes the water in the solution to evaporate, whereas the copper sulfate remains. So you're not only identifying, you're explaining as well. So we're going to do an example of that. You are going to hand draw this in this section here. Obviously, you do your title down the bottom because it's a figure. A diagram is called a figure, and you put the title at the bottom. So we'll name that, and then you do your drawing here in pencil, and you do it as neatly as you can. So for example, you need to use a ruler when drawing anything straight, and take your time. So my suggestion would be to do a rough draft first. But just for the purpose of explanation, I'm just going to use this picture here. So what I've done here is I've got my I've used text boxes and arrows. Okay, so first of all, figure 1. We have to come up with a title. So figure 1 might be distillation and evaporation practical setup. All right, and of course that should all be underlined, and the figure 1 section should be bolded. Okay, that's already done for you, of course, but I just want to make sure it's done. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at my diagram, or you draw it, of course. I've got the luxury of having mine drawn, and then you label the main parts. So the conical flask, the one-hole stopper, glass tubing. This is our condensing tube, but it's actually just a glass tube. We've got our clamp, we've got our test tube, our retort stand, and our Bunsen burner at the bottom here. So you've pretty much labeled it. That's just a standard diagram. What we now have to do is add the annotations. Okay, so I've got my text box docs here, and it might be something along the lines of, I'm pointing here where the Bunsen burner is. Burner provides heat needed to separate solution, full stop. So that's the first thing. Heat is provided. Okay, so you can say something along the lines of copper sulfate and water have different boiling points, which means the water will boil, or sorry, I should say evaporate at a lower temperature than curves. All right. So we've done that. So that's the first one. All right. I then might go, and it's a bit easier for you because you won't have to worry about text box and all that kind of stuff. So put this one here, maybe 2, and I'll get my arrow. There it is. And I might point to what's going on here. So 2, solution heats to 100 degrees, at which point the water turns to steam. In its okay, so solution heats to 100 degrees, at which point the water turns to steam. Copper sulfate remains in its current state. what happens then? Okay, so you need to go step by step explaining the actual process that's going on. So we've explained these two very first steps. Where does the steam go? It goes up, it gets pushed up the tube. What happens when it gets into the tube? What happens in the glass tubing? You know, step by step by step by step, all the way to the point where we end up with the distilled water here, and we're at the end of our process. So that's what's involved in the annotated diagram. You need to think about what you're trying to write in each of your steps, because you obviously don't want to write a huge thesis. You just want to have an explanation of exactly what's going on each of the different steps. Okay, so once you've done that, the other thing is make sure, reminder, use pencil, use a ruler. You've been given this space provided, so my suggestion would be to use a large section of the middle, leave the outer edges for where you put your annotations or your notes, and then go for there. Take your time, do a rough draft, and then obviously do a good copy. Okay, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.